Amidst the shadows and mud of the German trenches, desperation was no longer just a haunting presence. It was a living, breathing entity that clung to every soldier, suffocating hope and fueling an agony that no amount of discipline could suppress. That morning, the stale air hung heavy, thick with memories of fallen comrades and the relentless roar of distant artillery. The ground itself seemed to swallow the light, a bleak reminder that nature was indifferent to the struggles of men. But on this day, something even more terrifying was about to unfold, a realization so profound and crushing that it would shift the very course of the war. Before sunrise, whispers echoed along the narrow passageways, the nervous rumors of an enemy awakening with new power. Eyes swollen from restless nights darted toward the battered horizon. The routine sounds of boots sloshing through mud and the clink of tin cups became a chorus of dread. The trenches, carved in frantic haste and patched with whatever the Germans could scrounge from the ruins of battle, felt smaller, oppressive. The flicker of candlelight did little to dispel the terror sewn into each corner, each battered dugout. Somewhere above, the humming grew louder. At first it was dismissed as another British reconnaissance flight, or perhaps just wishful thinking for peace. But as the mechanical drone grew into a thunder, the officers knew the sky itself was about to betray them. The Americans had arrived. It began as a shadow, a formation of planes gliding through the mist, larger and more brazen than anything seen before. The Germans had spent months in these trenches, devising clever ways to survive artillery, gas, and sniper fire. But air dominance, true air supremacy, was a new horror. Each soldier watched as the darkness above parted, revealing the silver wings of American aircraft, engines roaring with righteous fury. Every instinct screamed to hide, to brace for the unknown. The sky, once shared and contested, now belonged to a force that seemed infinite. In those first moments, confusion reigned. Machine gun crews scrambled, struggling to angle their weapons skyward. But the American planes swooped with an impossible precision, painting the morning with streaks of fire. Bombs exploded with a violence that shattered earth and soul alike. Men yelled orders, many lost behind masks of panic, struggling not only against the enemy but the very boundaries of their fortitude. The officers shouted above the chaos, their voices cracking against the enormity of what unfolded overhead. German anti-aircraft weapons, the revered flak batteries, fired desperately into the clouds, sending bursts of shrapnel that seemed feeble against the coordinated dance of American pilots. The training that had sustained these men, the dogged routines, the endless drills, now looked frail, almost farcical. There were no tactics for this kind of fear, no lessons for when the very sky turned lethal. All they could do was hope that luck, not skill, might spare them. Among the ranks huddled in foxholes, faces became pale masks, eyes widened with stark realization. The sky, once an unpredictable but manageable battlefield, was slipping away from them. The American airmen above flew with an aggression that bordered on vengeance, strafing lines, dropping bombs, and weaving through artillery with a confidence that made the earth below tremble. The trenches, built to withstand infantry and artillery, suddenly seemed useless. Barbed wire, sandbags, and timbers offered no shield against fire from above. The ground shook with each explosion, sending showers of dirt and splinters in every direction. The muddy water at the bottom of each trench turned red, mixing blood with the earth in a grim union that felt biblical. The thunder of bombs, the shriek of engines, and the relentless grind of machine guns transformed the morning into a hellscape from which there was no escape. One young corporal, barely 18, clutched his rifle as if it were a lifeline. His letters home had always spoken of bravery, of the noble fight against Europe's enemies, but now he found himself praying to survive just one more minute. Next to him, a sergeant barked orders, trying to rally the men, his voice drenched in desperation. "Hold the line," he cried, though everyone knew that lines drawn in mud could no longer hold. Throughout the ranks, a new understanding dawned. The American planes did not fight like the ones that came before. Their targets were precise, their fire coordinated. Trenches, supply dumps, and communication posts evaporated in clouds of earth and smoke. Men who had survived countless barrages and gas attacks now faced death from an enemy they could barely see but could never escape. Eyewitness accounts would later describe this day as the moment the German army's spirit began to crack. For years they had relied on clever tactics, strategic positions, and an almost superhuman endurance. Now the mythology of invincibility collapsed. For the first time, many realized that their enemy was not just formidable on the ground, but unbeatable in the heavens. Some tried to run, seeking shelter deeper in the labyrinth of trenches, but the explosions followed, echoing with a cruel finality. Above the carnage, American pilots saw the chaos unraveling below. They had been trained for this, the fast-paced attacks, the merciless bombardments. But even they felt the weight of the moment. Each pass over the German lines was a statement, a declaration that the old order had been shattered. No longer would the Germans rule the skies or dictate the terms of battle. From this day forth, every soldier in every trench knew that the sky belonged to America, and with it came a terror that would haunt them forever. Yet, in the aftermath, amidst ruined earth and broken bodies, a strange silence settled over the trenches. Survivors looked to each other, searching for reassurance in hollow eyes. Hope could not be found for miles in any direction. The Americans had stolen more than territory. They had stolen the very notion of safety, the sanctuary once offered by the cover of night or the cold embrace of fog. As the sun finally broke through the clouds, it revealed the price of this new war, the shattered landscape, the aching memory of brothers lost to fire from above, and the knowing glances of those who understood that nothing would ever be the same again. In this silence, the reality was undeniable. The Germans had lost the sky, and with it a piece of their soul. This was the day the legend of German invincibility died, replaced with a dread that no trench or bunker could hide from. Every soldier would carry that morning within them, etched into their memory in blood and fire, a chilling reminder that in war, the greatest horrors often come from above, and so the whispers of dread matured into a lasting roar, a warning for all who dared challenge the power now unleashed in the skies. What was once contested territory had become the Americans' throne, and from it they looked down, rewriting every rule of battle with steel, flame, and thunder. It was not the mud, nor the disease, nor the gnawing hunger that broke the spirit of the trenches that day. It was a force wrought from innovation, precision, and determination. America, until then a distant rumor on the western horizon, arrived in the form of thunder, one written on the wings of the young and the bold. As dawn peeled away the night's suffocating shroud, the German lines braced for artillery. But what came next rewrote every expectation. The American planes were neither legend nor myth. Anymore they were reality, a reality painted in chrome and fury. Their first arrivals, inexperienced and sometimes equipped with outdated machines, were mistaken for a minor threat, but that illusion would be shattered amid the chaos of 1918. For weeks, German reconnaissance had picked up increasing activity far beyond their own battered airfields. But the scale of what happened at Saint-Mihiel stunned their most seasoned veterans, Wibbeard Webb. Before sunrise, General Pershing and Major General Mason Patrick oversaw a gathering of air power never before witnessed in war. The size alone was shocking: 701 pursuit planes, 366 observation aircraft, 323 day bombers and 91 night bombers, a staggering force totaling almost 1,500 Allied aircraft. The signal was unmistakable. America and her allies would no longer cower beneath the German aces. Instead, they would seize the heavens with overwhelming force. In those chilling hours, the German trenches buzzed with activity. Officers barked orders, anti-air batteries prepared their munitions, and every eye strained against the mist for the enemy's outline. For years, Germany's airmen had held the edge, boasting some of the war's deadliest machines and tactics. Now, however, confusion reigned as salvos detonated along the trenches, once from above, now from every conceivable direction. The Saint-Mihiel offensive exploded with coordinated terror. American aircraft did not simply pass overhead. They flooded every corner of the sky. The Germans tried to respond, repositioning fighters and anti-air batteries, but the rhythm of the attack was designed to trap and mislead. First, American bombers hammered the right flank, drawing defense there. Then attackers swept left, pinning down German reinforcements. Meanwhile, an entire wave had circled behind the main defenses, striking at the vulnerable rear and sowing chaos in command posts, supply lines, and artillery batteries. Web 6, a corporal crouching in a battered section of trench, recalled later. The ground shook with such violence that we thought the world was ending. The noise never stopped. From above, the Germans looked exposed, vulnerable. Tunnels and bunkers offered little protection from machine guns firing thousands of rounds, bombs dropping with mechanical inevitability, and spotter planes calling down further strikes with brutal efficiency. For 4 days, the air campaign blotted out the sun. American squadrons made more than 3,300 flights, spent over 4,000 hours above the front, dropped 75 tons of explosives, and fired 30,000 machine gun rounds. The relentless effort destroyed enemy balloons, downed more than 60 German planes, and shredded the once-hidden rear area of the German defenses. British bombers, collaborating with the Americans, attacked airfields and grounded aircraft, deepening the rout and forcing desperate German repositioning elsewhere. Web Seusis. That morning, German morale bent under the assault like wire beneath bombardment. Veterans who had survived years of attrition felt terror gnaw at discipline. Their fabled infantry planes, Junkers J-1 and armored recon scouts, struggled to adapt, suffering heavy losses in the effort to stem the incoming storm. Troops watched in helpless agony as their critical lines, communications, supply dumps, medical stations were vaporized by the rain of iron and fireweb. A young airman, Hans Adler, had once believed the sky was a chessboard for his squadron's nightly duels. Now he understood that the new age was not a contest, but a massacre. Outnumbered and outgunned, German fighters scrambled to intercept. In the confusion, Adler's wingman was downed in a fireball. Another disappeared in clouds of smoke before Adler could react. The Americans pressed home their advantage, pursuing with a fury honed by months of sacrifice, training, and loss. The tide turned irreversibly at Saint-Mihiel, where the Americans isolated the German salient and in 2 brutally efficient days captured thousands of prisoners and hundreds of artillery guns. Never before had aviation so powerfully altered a ground battle. Never before had the air become the axis of fate. Web is sound. From the trenches, the experience was apocalyptic. Barrages from above and below churned earth and flesh alike. Orders given in desperate whispers were swallowed by the roar, the grind of bombs and the buzz of strafing. Defenders who had learned to adapt to artillery fire, to survive gas attacks and snipers, now faced annihilation from a direction that left no refuge. Vertical punishment. Men clawed at the ground, piling up sandbags and debris, but explosions penetrated every shelter. The lucky scrambled into deep dugouts, praying to be overlooked by the spotters whose cameras and eyes seemed everywhere. For the first time, it truly felt as if the sky itself was hunting them. Those who dared climb ladders or peer through periscopes described a panorama of destruction, a rain of steel that defied imagination. The survivors would whisper of that morning for decades, recalling how every rhythm of daily life, the routine of rationing water, distributing ammunition, lighting a cigarette in shaking hands, collapsed beneath the intensity of air power. One felt so small, a sergeant wrote, there was nowhere left to hide. The air belonged to them. In command posts, German officers scrawled frantic reports demanding reinforcements and coordination, but the speed and coordination of Allied attacks outpaced bureaucratic hope. For every counterattack launched, a squadron of American and British bombers responded in minutes. Communications faltered. Flares and urgent runner dispatches could not keep up with the merciless pounce of tracer and bomb. Above, generations of American aviators, many fresh from civilian life, now steeped in courage, looked down at the carnage, feeling both triumph and the sick weight of war's cost. They understood that their victory in the air would not erase the agony below, yet it would fundamentally alter the world's balance forever. As the Saint-Mihiel offensive ended, the legend became fact. The sky, so long bitterly contested, was now dominated by Allied airmen. The German army began its long retreat, and the myth of its invincibility became another casualty, drowned beneath 1,200 words of terror and thunder from above. From that moment, the war's survivors, on every side, knew they had witnessed the dawn of a new order, where the heavens no longer offered hope or sanctuary, but judgment. And no one under those skies would ever forget the price of losing them. With the thunder of the Saint-Mihiel offensive still echoing through every collapsed trench and crater, the true scale of America's arrival was only beginning to dawn upon friend and foe alike. There had been rumors, always rumors, of the Americans, their untested youth, their brash optimism, their factories churning out men and machines faster than Europe's weary arms could keep pace. But now, as the German lines reeled from the coordinated fury unleashed from above, a new breed of warrior began to haunt the dawn skies. These were not the battle-hardened knights of Fokker triplanes, nor the fatalistic French aces who had made the sky a cemetery for so many. They were Americans, and though their legacy in air combat was still fledgling, their determination would shatter the rules of war. The United States Army Air Service, forged in chaos and rivalry, rose to power only in late 1918. Its ranks overflowed with ambitions and clashing personalities. Even General Pershing had been forced to issue direct orders just to untangle bureaucratic knots and infighting among officers. The demands of modern war simply would not wait. Logistics had to move as fast as propellers. Mason Patrick, a meticulous planner, was brought in to whip the air service into shape. Recruiting, supply, training, everything had to scale overnight if the new aerial cavalry was to take control of the sky's web. Pershing had called for the impossible, over 200 squadrons operating at the front by 1919. But ultimately, the focus turned toward what could be achieved quickly and decisively. Corporals from the cornfields of Iowa and lieutenants straight from college. Lecture halls underwent rushes of frenzied training that often left them one step ahead of disaster and one step behind the realities of aerial combat. Yet what they lacked in experience, they compensated with an unjaded ferocity, a refusal to play only by Europe's ancient rules. Web. Even as the Allies scrambled to build a unified air command, American technology lagged behind. Most pilots learned their deadly art in French and British planes, Sopwith Camels, SE-5As, Nieuport 28s. American factories would make headlines, but in 1918, it was the imported machine and borrowed doctrine that propelled the Yankees skyward. Yet as new Spad-3 fighters rolled off the assembly lines, the Americans grew more dangerous still, their skill leveling up with each week of flown combat sorties. The tale of legendary ace Eddie Rickenbacker, claiming 26 victories in just a few months, was sung in every ready room, proof that given the tools, the Americans could do more than just survive. The Battle of San Miguel had become the proving ground. Over 1,400 Allied planes, including 701 pursuit ships and hundreds of bombers and spotters, blotted out the Sun Web 6. Here, brigades of the air service learned coordination on a scale never before seen. Some swept far ahead, raking supply lines and columns with machine gun fire. Others circled back to strafe fleeing infantry, or hammered strong points with high explosives. Observation squadrons carved intricate lattices of knowledge over the German rear, relaying critical troop movements and guiding artillery with a precision that months earlier had seemed a miraculous fantasy. But all this effectiveness came at a terrible price. The Green squadrons bled heavily, nowhere more than in those desperate minutes when they tangled with Germany's best, aces of the Richthofen Circus and Jasta squadrons. For every victory and every downed observation balloon, there was the bitter loss of a friend. The American dead fell from flaming cockpits, vanished into the tangled forests below, or spent hours in captivity planning their next escape. Still, every loss steeled the will of those who survived. The sky had become a forge. On the ground, this new breed was changing the tenor of the trenches as well. Survivors of the last Allied push found themselves shadowed, always, by the promise that the clouds above could suddenly burst with friendly fire. German soldiers who once welcomed fog and drizzle as a reprieve from British artillery now dreaded the break in the clouds. For through those fissures, the low-flying American bombers and strafing flights would arrive. There was no pattern, no safe time of day. Attacks could be sudden, ceaseless, and deadly in their unpredictability. In command tents, senior German officers at last confronted the new reality. Reports flooded in. Communications lines downed, field kitchens shattered, enemy aircraft spotted only moments before the destruction rained down. Anti-aircraft crews, already stretched thin, now received orders to fire at the first sign of any movement above. Helpless, many could only watch as aviation changed the tempo of war, shifting the advantage to those who dominated the airwaves, as well as the green fields below Tepsy. Meanwhile, Americans paid for every lesson in blood. The 1st Pursuit Group and later 2nd, 3rd and 4th Pursuit Groups ran themselves ragged, each unit striving for tactical brilliance and collective survival. By the war's end, 45 squadrons had claimed over 700 enemy planes and almost 80 balloons, but had lost more than 280 aircraft of their own and hundreds of men webchassed and websert. Every loss was recalculated, every tactic adapted, creating a legacy of quick learning and relentless adaptation. Yet for all this suffering and ferocity, there emerged a strange sort of hope. Many young airmen began the war in awe of their allies, the French, the British, even the Russians fighting from battered airstrips. But by November 1918, no one doubted that the Americans had earned their seat at the table. They had helped alter not only the ground war, but the very structure of conflict. At last, it became clear that whoever commanded the skies would command the destiny of armies. Among the ruins of Ypres, in the battered outskirts of Amiens, within the smoking aftermath of Saint-Mihiel, a new breed of soldier was growing in legend. Fewer than 1,000 Americans would decorate the rosters as aces, yet their impact would echo down the generations, shaping doctrines that would split the atom and lift men beyond the troposphere. The story of 1918 was not just one of machines, nor even of strategy, but of the unbreakable will of those who soared upwards, risking everything so their brothers below might survive another day. In the battered German trenches, soldiers watched these developments with wide eyes. What they witnessed was not merely fire and death, but an announcement, a message they could not ignore. The war for the earth was being decided above their heads. Their officers might still boast of tactical genius and years of defense in depth, but even they now wrote in secret diaries about their fears, their awe, and the sense that the world had truly changed forever. The twilight of the ancient war reached closer with each passing flight. And long after Saint-Mihiel, Meuse, Argonne, and every shattered village in between, the story of the ascendancy of American air power would live on, not only as a chapter in the textbook history of war, but as a moment when humanity realized that the heavens themselves could be won or lost by the courage, ingenuity and sacrifice of a new breed that dared to rise. At the turning point of 1918, the air above Saint-Mihiel swarmed with possibility and terror, a scene so unprecedented that even veterans of Verdun felt dwarfed by the scope of what unfolded overhead. The Americans, struggling through years of preparation, setbacks and rivalry, joined their allies in the single largest coordinated air effort the world had ever witnessed. This chapter in history was not simply written in fire and steel, but in the collective spirit of thousands. Days before the offensive, Major General Mason Patrick and forecasters at headquarters marked maps with squadrons and flight paths, knowing well the gravity of what was to come. American airmen, not yet seasoned by years of European combat, were hurried into borrowed French and British aircraft, Sopwith Camels, SE-5As and Nieuports not wanted by the host nations. Their engines and guns a patchwork of innovation and necessity, Webby says Webby. The pilots trained as best they could, their briefings frantic but full of hope. This would be their true baptism, the test of everything America had sacrificed and dreamt. In the weeks leading to the battle, small units practiced coordinated flights alongside Italians, British and even French aerial divisions. Airfields behind Allied lines buzzed with mechanics, fine-tuning engines, and crews memorizing codebooks for communication and targeting. The largest Allied gathering in history loomed: 701 pursuit planes, 366 observation aircraft, 323 day bombers, and 91 night bombers, a staggering force of 481 planes, ready to unleash devastation on the German salient de Web. When the attack opened in the dim light of September 1918, layers of formation locked the sky into a fortress no German observer could penetrate. Led by the brash and visionary Colonel Billy Mitchell, waves of Allied aircraft orchestrated raids, as varied as they were relentless. Mitchell, drawing experience from his time working with the French Sixth Army, insisted that air power must be concentrated, not spread thin. He placed his squadrons close to the front, directing bombers and fighters to not just attack enemy troops, but also to strike deep behind lines, disorganizing German reserves and annihilating supply and communication networks. Web C6PU. Web. The first day was catastrophic for German defenses. Observation balloons burst overhead, sending crews scrambling for shelter. American pilots, many flying unfamiliar machines, braved fierce flak and enemy fighters, their formations coordinated through flares and coded messages. Pursuit squadrons swooped low, strafing trenches and convoys, while bombers soared higher, dropping tons of explosives on artillery emplacements and railway lines. Each hour churned the ground below and filled the sky with the shrapnel haze web. Web-C. The Germans scrambled desperately to respond. On dugout roofs, anti-aircraft crews fired skyward, tracking targets through maelstroms of smoke. Veteran aces of Jasta squadrons darted through chaos, seeking to intercept bombers or drive off straggling fighters. Yet the coordinated assault forced them onto the defensive. Frontline troops received little warning as the skies darkened. And by night the attacks persisted with a ghostly persistence. Webenwebersen within the trenches, soldiers listened in horror as the barrage above joined the inferno below. Rats scattered, mud churned, and wounded men cried out for medics, many lost beneath shattered earth. Letters home from surviving privates described a storm that never ceased, a vision of death raining indiscriminately. Some officers, faced with breakdowns in telephone lines and shattered command posts, resorted to sending runners through burning terrain, almost always a death sentence. Every movement became dangerous. Scouts who climbed ladders or peered through periscopes could glimpse the spectacle. Allied bombers making broad sweeps, escorted by 2s and 4s of nimble fighters, while flaming debris twisted back to earth. Troop trains, once hidden in forests and valleys, found themselves obliterated by squadrons with detailed maps and radio coordinates handed down by reconnaissance flights. Not a corner of the German salient could escape, but for the Americans every sortie extracted its price. Pilots wrote in their journals of comrades lost to flak, engine failure and dogfights. Many squadrons suffered heavy casualties, especially those forced to fly repeated missions with little rest or inadequate supplies. Persistence and bravery marked their efforts. Fear only sharpened their resolve. Over the course of the campaign, 1st Pursuit Group alone had more than 1,000 aerial engagements, losing men but relishing every hard-fought success. The downing of 151 enemy aircraft and 50 observation balloons, each a testament to their skill and rising reputation. Webb. As the Saint-Mihiel operation forced the German army into retreat, American air power carved a new legend into military history. Not only could an overwhelmed, untested force rise to match its veteran adversaries, but coordination, timely, strategic, and relentless, could reshape the battlefield itself. No longer was air war an afterthought for ground campaigns. Now it had become the axis of fate, where the outcome on Earth was dictated by those who dared to control the skyweb. Commanders on both sides began rewriting doctrine. For German High Command, defeat over Saint-Mihiel signaled the rise of multinational air operations as the future of warfare. Reports pointed to the growing specialization of Allied units, bomber, pursuit, night attack, balloon busting, and how these functions combined to overwhelm even well-organized defenses. Meanwhile, Pershing's staff revised their planned organizational expansion, shifting from hundreds of squadrons, promised earlier, to concentrated groups capable of operating in mass formation. Bureaucracy found itself forever changed, forced by necessity and combat reality. For the troops on the battered ground, the experience would not be soon forgotten. Veterans whispered about the relentless noise, the omnipresent danger, the sight of airmen dueling above and bombs shattering the soil below. They saw history being transformed, not in the corridors of power, but in every moment survived and every friend mourned. As Saint-Mihiel faded into memory, the Americans looked to the future. Next came Meuse-Argonne, where lessons learned in agony and triumph would be tested again in blood. From basic airfields behind the lines to shattered towns on the front, every survivor understood the cost of victory. It was measured not only in territory gained, but in the forging of a new era where wings would define the fate of nations. In those final days, as Allied flights circled overhead in victory laps, the landscape scarred but hopeful, the air itself pulsed with newfound authority. The sky was no longer contested. For the first time, it belonged to those who had paid for its dominion with sweat, ingenuity, and the irrevocable loss that war demanded. Thus ended the chapter over Saint-Mihiel, a lesson in unity, a crucible of innovation, and a promise that the battle for the skies had only just begun. By the late summer of 1918, warfare had evolved into a deadly ballet of innovation and desperation, with the skies above Europe transforming into a crucible that would forever change the nature of battle. Tactical doctrine in World War I was no longer confined to mud-splattered maps and frantic orders shouted along the front lines. It now stretched upward, demanding new strategies and new forms of courage. Both sides raced to master the air, knowing that whoever seized it could dictate the fate below. The conflict's opening years saw aircraft used mainly for observation web. Pilots in fragile biplanes or monoplanes soared above enemy positions, maps and cameras in hand, snapping aerial photographs that would soon shape every bombardment and maneuver. The earliest aircrews carried nothing more than pistols or rifles, their missions dangerously exposed, yet vital for the artillery units waiting below. But war is invention under pressure, and by the time Saint-Mihiel exploded over eastern France, every side had learned that observation was only the beginning. German and Allied designers raced to arm their machines. Innovations like the Fokker synchronization gear enabled pilots to fire machine guns directly through the spinning propeller without spraying deadly rounds into their own engines. Suddenly the front lines erupted with dogfights, the deadly ballet of pilot versus pilot, machine against machine. Victories and losses once measured in yards of trench now unfolded in the fleeting moments of pursuit curves and diving rolls. Legends like the Immelmann turn became gospel, maneuvers invented in panic and honed through the agony of repeated combat. By 1917, a rising tide of ground attack tactics added new dimensions to the fight. Aircraft strafed enemy trenches on sight, swooping low to unleash gunfire on convoys and squads, scrambling along muddy roads. Bombing raids, once haphazard, became precise. Selected targets such as artillery batteries, supply depots, and communication hubs were marked for destruction. Americans learned these lessons from British and French allies, adapting every trick and every risk for their own young airmen. For the British, aerial coordination with tanks turned the tide, as ground support evolved to strike anti-tank guns, isolated infantry, or retreating masses. Every innovation aimed at breaking the gridlock of trench warfare. Germany countered with its own genius, fielding armored aircraft like the formidable Junkers J-1. So heavily protected, it earned the nickname Furniture Van, Hans. Infantry planes, two-seater scouts, and massive bombers took the battle directly to Allied lines, dropping grenades, firing synchronized machine guns, and sometimes even flinging cluster bombs on luckless defenders below. Though Allied airmen outpaced Germany in numbers, the Junkers and Halberstadt models carved a reputation for surviving low-level attacks that shredded British and French positions at Cambrai and Amiens. For both sides, the campaign overhead became as savage as anything on the ground. Allied reconnaissance squadrons pushed deeper beyond the front, marking retreating columns and guiding artillery in real time via radio. Contact patrols signaled troop movements or called in immediate bombardment, their position shifts hastily relayed by wireless code and colored marker panels spread over devastated villages. From Amiens to Meuse-Argonne, the rhythm was constant. Observe, strike, evade, survive. Dogfights swept at every altitude. Veteran pilots perfected tactics of attack from the sun, diving steeply at unsuspecting opponents and using the glare to mask their approach. Germans fighting from Fokker D-7s, French in Spads and British in Bristol F-2Bs, Americans in borrowed Camels and Nieuports, all claimed the skies in turn. Incendiary bullets targeted observation balloons filled with hydrogen, terrifying weapons that could burst into flames and force parachuting escapes for survivors. Every pilot understood the risks. By war's end, many aces faced death in flames or captivity. Anti-aircraft artillery mirrored aerial advances. Archie gunners, as the British called them, sent up clouds of fragmentation shells, blanketing the sky to deter low-flying attackers. Observers quickly became targets, and special bullets, explosive Pomeroy rounds or the famous Le Prieur rockets, blasted at zeppelins, airships, or ground positions with equal ferocity. The race for technological supremacy was relentless, with recoilless rifles and autocannons hastily mounted to bombers, though often with mixed success. on the shadowed ground, those who survived artillery now had to reckon with death from above. Trenches no longer granted reliable refuge. Bombing raids and strafing runs killed with no warning. Shrapnel fell not only from exploding shells, but from mechanical predators overhead. Low-flying attackers raked troops and supply lines, driving units underground. Germans and Allies alike sped up construction of deeper dugouts, camouflaged positions and bunker networks. But every day the challenge of surviving became more complex. Strategic bombing grew ever more important. Allied and German command recognized the power of targeting infrastructure, railway hubs, ammunition dumps, bridges, factories. Bombers used contact patrol tactics, sometimes coordinating with tanks and ground forces to force breakthroughs at Cambrai, Saint-Mihiel, and Amiens-Weby. For Americans, the lessons were brutal but effective. Each campaign forged airmen who understood not just the science of warfare but its costs in spirit and flesh. Central to these campaigns was the struggle for true air superiority. Allies learned quickly that tactical capability hinged on controlling the skywebs. Aerial success at Amiens and Saint-Mihiel was inseparable from dominance overhead. Every bombing raid or strafing attack was more likely to succeed when enemy fighters and anti-air batteries were suppressed or destroyed. The entire chain, from observer to pilot, from commander to trench survivor, depended on the shifting winds above. By 1918, doctrine had evolved. Massed air power was the answer. Billy Mitchell and others advocated concentration, not dispersion, sending whole sections of squadrons against a single weak point, overwhelming enemy defenses with numbers, precision, and relentless coordination. The largest operations of the war, blending British, French, Italian, and American squadrons, buried the German defenders beneath a sky that never seemed empty. Losses remained staggering. The final Meuse-Argonne campaign saw US flyers drop 140 tons of bombs, participate in 150 missions, down 781 enemy planes and 73 balloons, but lose nearly 300 aircraft and 237 men in just a few short months. Every tactic was written in blood. Yet these efforts and this scale of loss achieved the impossible. They forced the German resignation, closing the war with an armistice none believed possible months before. The tactics of 1918 forged by chaos, the dogfight, the ground attack, the relentless pursuit of supply lines and command posts became the foundation for every war that followed. From the devastated fields of eastern France, strategies took flight that would one day turn blitzkrieg into doctrine and inspire legends of air power for generations. The survivors, battered but victorious, carried the scars and the stories back to a waiting world changed forever. In the quiet aftermath, when the thunder faded and the trenches emptied, tactical innovation endured. The war's closing months proved to every witness on both sides that the mastery of the skies dictated more than tactics. It dictated destiny. And for every soldier who looked upward and survived, the memory of those wings, their machine fury, and their promise was a legacy that could never be erased. By the waning months of 1918, the battle for aerial dominance had altered not just the outcome of the war on the ground, but the psychology of every man who walked, crawled, or dug into the trenches below. As Allied squadrons carved fresh legends in the clouds over Saint-Mihiel and Meuse-Argonne, soldiers and officers alike found their once reliable refuges shattered by new tactics and relentless weaponry. The sky, once an unpredictable field, was now a carefully orchestrated domain, a shadow that stretched over every waking moment and became the ultimate decider of fate. Web. Ground forces, battered for years by relentless artillery, adapted with increasing desperation. Trenches deepened, dugouts extended, camouflaged nets stretched over positions as men feverishly sought shelter from the hell raining overhead. Yet neither mud nor timber could resist the growing arsenal of death descending from above. Anti-aircraft units scrambled to deploy Archies, shells that exploded mid-air, blanketing invasion routes in fragmentation and smoke web. The British used explosive Pomeroy rounds and incendiary bullets, seeking to bring down observation balloons and zeppelins with fire and terror. Whole units drilled for survival. Knowing a single formation of aircraft could erase weeks of labor in moments. Webitasa. Among the most haunting innovations was the rise of the observation balloon. Floating at dizzying heights just behind front lines, these hydrogen-filled giants provided unmatched intelligence. They mapped troop movements, tracked artillery barrages, and relayed vital updates to headquarters by telephone and signal lines Yet their value made them prime targets. Aces from both sides devised daring raids against balloons, fitting their fighters with incendiary bullets, guaranteed to erupt into flame on impact. Balloon observers, isolated in baskets 1,000 feet above the ground, wore parachute harnesses, always prepared to leap for their lives as enemy pilots strafed their station web. For airmen, the weapons of survival and destruction grew more elaborate. Early in the war, pilots defended themselves with pistols and grenades, leaning from open cockpits to lob crude explosives at targets below RAW. By 1915, interrupter gears allowed for machine guns to fire through forward. Propellers, transforming aircraft from mere eyes in the sky to predators capable of obliterating foes in dogfights and coordinated attacks. Web 70. Specialized armaments soon followed. Rockets and recoilless rifles for attacking balloons, hand-operated 37mm guns, even Rankin darts for bombing airships from above. Web brass. Every technological leap forced new tactics. By late 1917, Allied squadrons relied on coordinated formations, lines and stacks of bombers shielded by flanking fighters, patterns developed to overwhelm any opposition. Patrol leaders perfected the art of the ambush, climbing high above their adversaries before plunging at speed. Sun-blinded German pilots often never knowing what hit them. Combat shifted from solitary duels to swirling melees, each formation breaking apart into dozens of individual dogfights the moment guns opened fire. Web. Ground attack expanded rapidly. As aircraft were fitted for strafing and bombing, new units, ground support squadrons and armored infantry planes, were deployed to disrupt enemy formations, supply convoys and artillery emplacements. Webbaum. The German Junkers J-1, famously dubbed the furniture van, revolutionized low-altitude support. Its thick armor allowed it to endure fierce small arms fire as it hammered Allied trenches and positions. The British responded with the Sopwith Salamander, designed specifically to survive the carnage of ground attack. These machines, while effective, suffered alarming rates of attrition. Every mission risked man and metal, and countless airmen fell to a barrage of bullet, shell, and shrapnel. The effect on morale was devastating. Soldiers accustomed to the rhythm of artillery, count the seconds after the scream, duck, hope for luck, found the randomness of aerial attack unbearable. No longer limited to barrages or snipers, the hand of fate could now swoop down as a whine overhead, a sudden blast from above, leaving survivors in ragged disbelief. Medical stations, supply lines, and resting columns all fell prey to aerial raiders. Even behind the front, command posts that were once safe havens became targets in broad daylight. For commanders, the fight for the air became an obsession. New doctrines demanded the concentration of air power, mass attacks, coordinated sorties, relentless pressure on enemy air defenses. Billy Mitchell and his counterparts advocated overwhelming force, sending squadrons of bombers, fighters, and recon planes in tight formation against vulnerable ground positions. Each success made the sky more silent for the Allies, more menacing for the Germans. But the cost, calculated in burned metal and lost lives, climbed with every sortie. The struggle was most fierce over major offensives. At Amiens, Saint-Mihiel, and Meuse-Argonne, achieving air superiority was inseparable from victory on the ground. The Allies learned hard lessons. Tactical air power could not be wielded without first defeating the enemy in the sky. Every day the battle for control swung on the dogfights above, the Archie barrages, the attrition of skilled pilots. A single day of lost initiative could reverse weeks of progress. As American flyers joined the fray, they inherited the grim calculus of British, French, and Italian airmen. Every operation required suppressing German fighters, knocking out anti-aircraft emplacements, and paving the way for bombers to strike with impunity. Coordination between air and ground units became doctrine. Spotter planes tracked enemy movements, relaying positions via radio and marker panels. Close support bombing hammered artillery, before ground units pushed forward, and strafing attacks broke up flanking maneuvers before they developed Web TLBC. The last months of the war saw innovation breed desperation. German pilots flew their last sorties in increasingly outdated machines, struggling to arm balloons and trench lines against waves of coordinated attackers. The Allies continued to push the edge, fielding new weapons and tactics, incendiary ammunition, rapid climbing formations, concentrated night raids, and even experiments with autonomous aerial bombs. Balloon observers braved parachute drops as their stations fell in flames, many narrowly escaping death to land behind Allied positions. In the end, air supremacy became a psychological as much as tactical win. Men in the trenches now gauged every move by the drone of distant engines, gauging safety, not by ground cover, but by intervals between patrols. The color of dawn, the darkness of night, all held new meanings. The sky was either a shield or a sword, and for many, it was the final judge of survival. As armistice neared, both sides reflected on the transformation forced by air power Web to WebT. Warfare would never again be waged solely on the ground. Strategic and tactical bombing campaigns, planned but not executed at war's end, heralded the future battles over cities and supply networks. The men who watched the sky in terror or climbed into it in hope bore the scars of this revolution, each one a chapter in a legacy now stitched permanently into the story of mankind's most desperate conflict. Thus, with every shadow cast by a passing wing, the balance of war had tipped, forever irrevocably, toward those willing to seize the skies. The autumn of 1918 was a forge of invention and ruin, with every hour hammered by the titanic clash of weapon and will that defined the last months of World War I in the skies. Above the chaos of the trenches, where desperation seeped into every crack in the earth, the air war unfolded in layers of drama and disaster, driven by new technologies and a desperation to break the stalemate that strangled soldiers on all fronts. Web. Every battle was shaped by the relentless evolution of weaponry. At the war's start, most aircraft served as distant eyes for commanders, carrying only pistols or bundles of grenades, crude tools that imposed more terror than tactical advantage. Big Web, Twig found. But necessity breeds genius. The race to master the skies saw the birth of the interrupter gear, a mechanical marvel allowing bullets to fire safely through spinning propellers. First mounted on the Fokker Eindecker and quickly copied by Allies, this device transformed flying scouts into true fighters. Machine guns became standard, and air-to-air rockets were introduced, and notably the Le Prieur, for bringing down balloons and airships. No innovation was spared. British fighters fired explosive Pomeroy rounds to hunt Zeppelin raiders above London. German bombers, those giant Gotha machines, launched city raids timed for shock and fear, but found themselves vulnerable to fast-climbing Allied scouts armed with incendiary ammunition. All sides adapted weaponry to each new challenge, pushing fragile airframes and exhausted pilots to untenable limits. Some fighters, like the Spadis Tweed, even carried hand-operated cannons through hollow propeller shafts, making every engagement a one-shot duel with death. The arms race churned grimly below as well. Anti-aircraft artillery proliferated along the front, clouds of fragmentation shells rising to meet attackers in bursts nicknamed Archie by wary gunners. The first military airplane ever shot down by ground-based artillery revealed a new frontier in warfare, as Serbian Private Radoje Ljutovac downed a bomber using a captured Turkish cannon. From then on, every ground-based weapon became an integral part of air strategy, pushing pilots towards higher altitudes or evasive maneuvers and forcing ever more complex coordination with infantry and artillery curtains. The rise of observation balloons marked another tactical revolution. Filled with flammable hydrogen and tethered just behind the front line, these giants provided vital intelligence, mapping enemy movements and guiding barrages with telephone lines and signal flags. Balloon observers became prime targets. Balloon buster aces attacked in dramatic raids, firing incendiary rounds until the hydrogen erupted in sheets of flame. Parachutes became standard for balloon crews, who lived on the razor's edge, always ready to bail out as death came whistling down from the sky. Dogfights were elevated to legend, Lone scouts gave way to larger formations, soaring in stacked patrols that would break into a maelstrom of individual duels as soon as the attack commenced. Aces were forged in adrenaline and fear, their stories magnified by governments desperate to inspire hope. Propaganda painted pilots as chivalrous knights, masking the pitiless reality of flaming cockpits, exploded engines, and the endless grind of exhaustion. On the ground, tactics grew in complexity. Planes began to strafe trenches and supply columns, drop bombs on artillery, and disrupt communication nodes critical to defense. German infantry planes, especially the armored Junkers J-1, lumbered at low altitude, impervious to most rifle fire, raining destruction on British and French lines. The Allies responded with the Sopwith Salamander, built for survivability in the tempest below. These ground attack missions boosted morale, but exacted high attrition, each sortie wagering lives against a hope for breakthrough. Air superiority, pivotal to victory, was relentlessly contested. By late 1918, gaining control of the sky required suppression of enemy fighters, annihilation of balloons, and constant attacks on anti-aircraft batteries. Commanders orchestrated mass attacks, sending waves of bombers shielded by pursuit planes to overwhelm hardened defenses. Tactical air power merged with strategic bombing, targeting key infrastructure, railways, ammunition stores, bridges, and cities. The Allies pushed the edge with concentrated night raids, rapid climbing formations, and experiments with autonomous aerial bombs. Every new weapon required new courage. Pilots know well that each innovation might only tilt the odds for a single mission before provoking a deadlier response. Balloon attacks demanded split-second timing and a willingness to risk everything for a single kill, as defenders scrambled to intercept with explosive bullets and relentless anti-aircraft barrages. Ground attack runs forced pilots to fly low under a canopy of bullets, engines screaming, knowing that one mistake meant oblivion. The agony and heroism of such sorties carved legends into history and heartbreak into the survivors. The catastrophe of war was everywhere. Cities, once distant from the front, found themselves under bombardment, Paris and London suffering thousands of casualties from airship and bomber raids. The horror of flame and debris, the shrieks of civilians, the helplessness in the face of destruction, all became emblematic of the new world air war had created. In the trenches, soldiers measured each day not only by artillery and sniper threat, but by the engines singing above, the dread that no sanctuary existed from the sky's judgment. Yet, even in the shadow of catastrophe, men found courage. Some American flyers, still less experienced than British or French veterans, pushed themselves beyond all limit, learning new tactics from each hard-fought skirmish. Reconnaissance, bombing, ground attack. Every day demanded new skill and unimaginable nerve. Aces became mentors for the next replacement pilots, passing down secrets forged in moments of madness and daring. Balloon observers prayed for luck and became masters of improvisation, tracking battle from a precarious perch, always weighing intelligence against the risk of fiery death. By war's end, the tally of lessons was scored in blood and innovation. Strategic and tactical air power had changed how battles were fought and how fates were decided. Technology had created new spheres of terror and heroism. New weapons continued to appear. Incendiary rounds, rockets, automatic cannons, all crammed into machines as fragile as paper and as deadly as thunder. Pilots and ground crews developed rituals of survival, lucky tokens, prayers, whispered vows not to forget the faces of those lost. As November dawned and the guns began to silence, all sides reckoned with what air war had wrought. Catastrophe and courage had intertwined in every mission, every technological breakthrough, every failed and successful attack. The war had proven that the sky could never again be ignored, that every weapon would soon be judged by its reach into this unbounded new domain. And so, beneath the endless passage of clouds, the final tragedy and triumph of World War I's air war left a warning and a legacy, that in every future conflict, the race for weapons would be matched only by the race for the courage to wield them. Heroes and victims alike knew this truth as the sky grew quiet, a silence pregnant with the lessons, crimes, and glories of aviation's cruelest debut. When the guns finally grew silent in November 1918, there was more than the echo of peace rippling through the shattered landscapes of Europe. It was a new world, sculpted by fire, ruin, and courage, where the sky itself had become the battlefield's deciding factor. What began with fragile reconnaissance flights and daring observation balloon raids ended in a revolution that left no doubt. The sky belonged, in that final season, to America and her allies. The story began in uncertainty and desperation. Early war aviators carried little more than pistols and grenades, lobbing iron at enemy convoys and balloon targets, betting lives on inventions barely proven in test flights. Technologies hastily adapted under the pressure of carnage, soon rendering the battlefield unrecognizable, even to its oldest veterans. The interrupter gear transformed fighters, allowing guns to fire through spinning propellers. Incendiary and explosive ammunition turned dogfights into infernos at dizzying altitudes. Each tactical innovation spurred the creation of deadlier machines. From armored infantry planes such as the German Junkers, J-1 to the dedicated British ground attack Sopwith, Salamander Web 6, Web Hein 73, strategic. Thinking evolved alongside these terrifying new weapons. Reconnaissance, once the sole domain of airmen, became intertwined with tactical bombing and ground support. Web 1 Web Restrict. Balloon observers tethered in vulnerable chairs watched the ever-shifting front line and relayed critical intelligence to commanders, risking death with every burst of enemy fire or raiding ace overhead. In their wakes, fighter squadrons swept aside enemy resistance with massed attacks, breaking into swirling dogfights that produced air aces and legends for both sides. By the war's end, the Allied air strategy was a symphony of coordination, technology, and courage. Tactical air power supported ground advances, bombed supply lines and batteries, and relentlessly targeted command posts hidden far from the front. Some squadrons became specialists, balloon busters, bomber escorts, ground attack flights, each weaving survival and destruction into every patrol. The American arrival in 1918 forced a quantum leap in doctrine and effectiveness, merging raw numbers with fresh tactics learned from bitter Allied experience. Victory did not come easily. Every innovation, whether Le Prieur rockets desperate for one burning balloon or experimental recoilless rifles mounted on risky prototypes, was paid for in blood and sacrifice. Each Allied breakthrough ratcheted up the pressure on German defenses, whose front lines collapsed under coordinated strafing, precision bombing, and relentless ground attack patrols that had never before operated at such scale. At Saint-Mihiel and Meuse-Argonne, tactical air superiority proved inseparable from victory on the ground, both won and held at the cost of brave young pilots pushing fragile machines to their breaking points. Web 74. The war's end saw the ultimate outcome. Control of the sky became a synonym for control of the earth below. Defensive wonders such as Archie guns filled the air with fragmentation and flame, but could not hold back the swarm of Allied aircraft by war's final months. Aggressive bombing campaigns planned for 1919 would never come. The armistice halted their execution, but the spectre of total aerial destruction lingered. The world had glimpsed the horror lying just beyond the horizon. The legacy of America's airmen, untested but unyielding, became undeniable. Their courage forced a reimagining of how wars must be fought. Their sacrifices rewrote every rule of survival, every measure of tactical genius. The final months were a crucible, forging new leadership in the sky. Billy Mitchell's concentrated mass attacks, relentless joint operations, and rapid adaptation narrowed history's focus onto the men who dared risk everything in the pursuit of air mastery. For the German soldiers, those last days brought a heavy awareness. The familiar order of mud, barbed wire, and trench routine had surrendered to chaos, brought down not just by advances in artillery and infantry, but by the grace and fury of American and Allied planes overhead. Observation posts, supply depots, and command headquarters were no longer safe. Balloon crews bailed out under sheets of flame, artillery batteries vanished in bombs, and columns retreated or surrendered under the iron song of strafing machine guns. The sky was enemy territory now, and the legend of German invincibility was laid bare for all to witness, Webpax and Web. Webitis. When the armistice was declared, those who survived, pilots and infantry alike, carried home new scars. Some struggled to describe the fear. Engines roaring at dawn, bombers rumbling night after night, strange machines appearing on the horizon. Many found themselves changed by the sight of parachutes drifted down from burning balloons, by the echo of shattered cities far behind the lines, by the endless grind above their heads. Generals wrote new doctrine in the chaos, knowing that the next war would begin with air power, not with a thunderous charge from the earth. The haunted quiet that followed the end was marked by a world grown cautious and introspective. The silence above, once so dreadfully contested, became a moment to reckon with the weight of what had been achieved and lost. Strategic bombing had not yet reached its full horror, but battle-tested airmen understood that the next war would defy the old boundaries. If you've stood with us through the thunder of history, you know there's always more beneath the surface. Hit subscribe now and ring the bell, because every story of war, courage, and consequence deserves to be told. Join our ranks, dive deep into the untold battles, and become part of the mission to remember. Your next chapter starts here.